This is TWiT.
This episode of Tech Break is brought to you by ACI Learning. Certifications show more than proving a skill set. They let everyone see you are committed to keeping your knowledge and skills up to date. The products you've grown to love, IT Pro, Audit Pro, and Practice Labs, are now training the modern workforce together. Be bold. Train smart. Check out go.acilearning.com/twit to learn more.
Let's talk about WWDC, shall we? I know the wrong people, but Apple's developer conference, all the people are like, when's it going to be? When's it going to be? When's it going to be? And maybe it's because, they're in far off places and they want to be in California and that you have to make plane reservations. But surely we all knew that June 5th was going to be the date, right? Surely we all knew that already.
When has it ever been any other day? Like it's the first Monday of every June. Like, and you think there's like this mystery, but I don't remember any time when it wasn't the first Monday, even when it was like the first.
Yeah. When you have to buy non-refundable plane tickets. You just don't. You're like, I'm 90% sure, but am I $600 90% sure?
Right.
But it's also really different now because like 5 years ago, WWDC meant you're gonna be going to like a Shriners convention with 2,000 other Mac and iOS developer nerds, and so you kind of had to be there. And also, Apple had a lot more at stake because you have to prepare for the arrival of 2,000 nerds and make sure that they're all scheduled, make sure that they're all accommodated for. And now that Apple really does, as Alex had been predicting or maybe hoping for the past couple of years, Apple really does seem to be committed now to, no, we really don't want to have 2,000 nerds in our house tracking through our hallways. We're just going to do all virtual stuff. And now they're probably going to have a very, very limited live keynote, which they can easily reschedule for, they can easily backfill for whenever they want. Now it's almost as if they can really announce it 2 months in advance. And whatever they're ready for on June 5th, they'll be ready for. Whatever they're not ready for, it's not as though they had to make this huge investment of scheduling and planning in order to move things in and out of the schedule. So, I think that we may as well just make it like a holy day of obligation where just like you just know what day it is on the calendar. You can basically book it in advance, assuming that you're there to basically try to lean on people who might be loose-lipped because they're excited that something finally shipped. But it's not as exciting as it once was.
I think that it is the trend. I mean, NVIDIA had their conference a couple weeks ago, and it was the last time they did it physically, it was 8,000 people, and the last one they did that was completely digital was 250,000.
Yeah,
and so the scale is much different as you start to go virtual. Apple, E3 got canceled, which is typically a week after. The trend is not towards bigger physical events. That's not where we're going, and a lot of people want to think about that, but I think that this makes a lot more sense. One thing that I think has been a huge service to all Apple users is the fact that we're recording all those sessions now ahead of time and not forcing developers to stand on stage in front of 300 people and try to recite something that they memorized anyway. And so the thing is they memorized it, they rehearsed it, and then they have to perform it, and it's not fair to them. It's not fair to us because we have to watch it. And so I think that the fact that we are now, those are all pre-recorded, so much nicer. I just wish they'd record them, they'd release them all on Monday. There's this weird thing that Apple has done in the last couple of years, which is that we're going to release some on Monday and then some on Tuesday and some on Wednesday. And I'm like, just how about all of them on Monday? And then we pick the ones we want to watch, and that we'll see what happens with that. I'm hoping that they'll give that part up.
It's a little more manageable throughout the week, though. I mean, I also like going in with like 200 sessions and being like, I got to find the things I want to look for. So I kind of like that they're trying to build a community aspect around like a shared, this is what's happening on Monday, but Tuesday, Wednesday, etc. But it is a little strange to have it like when it is in theory. They could just hit that button and it could all be there.
Yeah. And the other point is that I don't think that it was appreciated exactly how disruptive it was to Apple to have so many of their engineers and so many of their key people tied up, or at least they're having their schedules really, really messed up for an entire week. And now that basically you can, if you have, even if the person who is in charge of explaining everything that there is about Reality Kit for a new unannounced wearable, you can pre-tape all of that and then at a time that's absolutely at the convenience of their schedule, and it won't disrupt anything anywhere. So,
the way they're handling it is interesting. So yes, the video production's going on in advance. That will disrupt them to a certain degree, but I think that there's more of a security blanket, right? There's less of the what if I say something wrong? If you're doing it and you just say something wrong, you just re-record the video, and there are professionals there to do all of that. There is a little bit of work for some people at Apple that week. They are doing, again, presumably what they did last year, where they have basically little Slack instances where you can go and chat with people who are Apple engineers. So they have to be sort of available for that. Some of them, and that's one of the nice things they've done now of making it an online event, because the point that I think we all need to recognize is that WWDC has been an online event for 99% of Apple developers for years and years, because the event got so big so quickly that it sold out, and people who wanted to come couldn't come. So their experience was the videos anyway, right? And so embracing that and saying, no, that is the experience, is the videos. And then separately, there's this Monday event, which I think we're all assuming will be very similar to what we saw last year, where some developers are going to win a lottery and they're going to get to come to Apple campus and sit somewhere, maybe Cafe Max, maybe the Steve Jobs Theater, and that the press will probably similarly be invited. And they have like a one-day kind of dog and pony show where you can watch the keynote and you can go visit the developer center, and it's a fun in-person event. But if you're not there, it's okay. You're getting the same presentations as everyone else. It's just streaming like it was, and that's okay.
I do wonder about the keynote, so as we move to this whole pre-recorded thing, and obviously the virtues are huge, right? You can run whatever demos you want. It's all pre-recorded. There's no chance that anything goes wrong, because you said you can just fix it. But I do wonder if the pendulum will swing back at some point, because of surely the spectacle nature of it. Like, you don't want to go to the circus and watch a pre-recorded like acrobats flying around. There's no interest in that. Like everybody, and it helps prove something to a certain degree, right? Like when it's like watching game footage, when they show off the new games, and everyone's like, well, but is that a pre-rendered cutscene or is that actual gameplay, right? Like what they're showing us on screen is obviously exactly what they want us to see. And of course, our questions are going to be, but what happens with all that stuff that like when you push the envelope, when you do the things that are sort of in those weird corners, and not just to break it, but to like experience like what are like the limits of this thing. So I do think you lose a little bit of something by having it pre-recorded, in that you miss that chance for a little bit of danger and a little bit of excitement, but I'm sure Apple doesn't quite see it that way.
Yeah, I think the problem is they're not really acrobats. They're if we, when we talk about the circus, the problem is they're not very good at this. Like most people who go on stage, we have to remember that most people do corporate presentations. They don't do these all day. They're not actors. They're not performers. They're really not very interesting to watch on stage. And so the hard part is that the pre-record, gives them their best option to look as good as they possibly can. And I don't think they're going back. You're seeing more and more of these conferences. And what happened was Apple, I think, instigated this in the sense that we started seeing Apple do this. We started seeing NVIDIA and other people doing this. And then people said, well, how has Google lost so much energy? And why does Microsoft's event feel so boring? It's because they were still doing them live. So the thing is, we're used to watching this much more produced, higher velocity, much more visually interesting video. And then when we go back to the stage, it just feels like it fell off a cliff, and it's just from an energy perspective. I don't think they can go back, and I don't think we're going to see any of that. I do think that being able to bring press in and having them be able to play with it, to do all the things you're talking about, which is to push the envelope and bang on it and do things with your, and see what it'll do. I think that's super important. Bringing the press in to see the equipment there is important, but the actual staged piece and the reality is I've worked on keynotes, many keynotes for many companies for a decade. Nothing about that's real anyway. It's like there's so much, like we have backups I don't know what Apple does, but we have backups to the presentation. If the presentation even looks like it's going to hiccup, you'll see this little slight little glitch in the pixels, and now we're just playing it out for you so that we don't have to show you a blue screen. So it's not it's not that real as it is. it's just a lot faster. And what we don't have to do is watch people who are not professional speakers try to speak, which is, that's the only time they do it every year. It's really hard to watch.
The bonus is nobody gets hit by a thrown Steve Jobs camera. So
that's it is. I mean, we lose. That's the acrobat falling off of the whatever they're on the tightrope.
Turn off your Wi-Fi, everybody.
Exactly is that moment, and it's very entertaining, but obviously something that Apple would never want you to do.
Yeah.
I think just to remind everybody, if you don't remember, last June, Apple held this event, and press and developers were at the Cafe Max in the Ring at Apple Park, and they had a big screen like a jumbotron set up, and they played the video on there simultaneous with streaming it to everybody else. So it was a live event, but live really only in the sense that a bunch of people were there, but they were watching the same video. Last September, Apple introduced the iPhone at an event at the Steve Jobs Theater. It was otherwise very much like WWDC in that there was an audience in the Steve Jobs Theater, but all we did, because I was there for that one, is watch the screen and watch the same video that was being streamed out to everyone else. The difference being that the press then went outside the theater to where all those new products were set up in a hands-on demo area. So the question I have for WWDC for 23 is it like last June? Is it a little more like last September? Is it a hybrid? Do they put the developers at Cafe Max in the Ring and have the press go to the Steve Jobs Theater and have two totally separate events that are happening simultaneously? I don't know. For WWDC, they led us over to the Steve Jobs Theater for our briefings and hands-on after the event. They took us away. They swept us away from the from where the developers were, so that the press could not, we could tempt them. We could turn them to our evil ways, and they don't want that. They want to keep the developers nice and pure. So I guess that's a stagecraft question: is if they might do that.
Well,
Andy?
It really is. It's less about stagecraft. I think it's about more about control. Apple has always been a company that loves to maintain control over every situation, but I really think they've kicked it up in the post-Jobs era in the past 5 or 6 or 7 years, where, I mean, most of the people in this actually, I think all of the people in this conversation have been at Apple events for more than 10 years. And we remember one of the reasons that justified for me spending more than $1,000 to fly from the East Coast to the West Coast for a presentation where, technically speaking, I suppose all I'm getting, you think that all I'm getting is a small amount of hands-on in a demo area if I don't have a meeting with the executives or whatever. But a lot of it was, hey, I recognize that person. That person is one of the head engineers on a project I'm very much interested in. I think I'll have an informal chat with him and see if his tongue is a little bit loose, or just overhearing conversations between people. And now Apple will never want to have that happen. And so this is the situation where they're going to make sure that if press are invited, when press are invited, they are in their own corral, and they are going to be steered through hallways where they cannot interact with anybody else to the place where they're supposed to be, because God forbid you have a conversation that is not being observed, controlled, corrected, or tamped down by Apple marketing. That's one of the signs of the newer version of Apple.
So I agree about the control. Never forget about Apple wanting control. And when Alex talks about completely rightly that you've got people who are not experts at speaking, but they get them to do the videos, but they're not in front of a packed house. That's true. But the other part of it is just control. It's always there. Apple wants complete control of the message. And if you pre-tape everything, then it goes through a whole approval process, and not a pixel is not intended exactly where it is intended to be. So it's a key part of it. I will say though that, I talked to some random Apple people at the iPhone event last September outside the Steve Jobs Theater. There are still people around you can talk to who are from Apple, but you're right, it's not quite the same as literally everybody who works at Apple is at a convention center somewhere off campus.
Oh yeah.
It's a different kind of vibe completely.
And what I will say is, I mean, sure, there's a chance that something could go wrong, but if we look at the last live events that happened before the going to pre-tape, I mean, every word is memorized, and they're reading off I wish it was memorized because they're reading them off a teleprompter. They, where they're putting their hands, how they're standing. You can tell that, and that's what makes it so uncomfortable to watch, is that somebody told them not to do the thing with their hands that they do every time they talk, and you keep on rocking back and forth. Don't do that anymore, and don't, like you have this thing that you say right before you say the thing. Stop doing that.
Yeah.
And so
they end up as robots, right?
And Apple does that more than anyone else, and they tighten them. The only company that really got good at this, in my opinion, is Salesforce. Their public facing speakers spend hours a week working on it, like year round.
The corollary to that too is the fact that it is pre-taped does allow them to draw on a deeper pool of talent.
Yes.
They wouldn't do as much on a live stage, right? Like it lets them go to people who are maybe VPs or product managers or stuff like that, who aren't going to get up because whether they don't want to or they don't have all that training, like Tim Cook or Eddie Q or somebody like that. And that is great because it lets them improve the diversity of the people presenting and get people who are actually closer to those projects, right? Like there are people who are directly involved with those things rather than be like, hey, Tim or Craig, talk about these 100 things, right? Craig could probably use a break, frankly.
And it's much more contextual. We can go to a mountain. We can go into a living room. We can go into, so the thing is just from a pure perspective of we're standing on a black box stage that has a wall behind it to we can actually take you places where I'm walking or sitting or doing it. It's much more dynamic. Yeah. It's just a much more interesting show. You do have control, but as a viewer, it's far easier to watch, I think. And I think that's the than the stage events. I find myself almost unable to watch any stage events now after I've started watching keynotes that came out pre-recorded. The stage events feel like they're going so slow that I'm like, I got to wait until this is VOD so I can watch it at 2x because I can't watch this at regular speed. It's just just not moving fast enough.